Hello and welcome to my tatami room here on the island of Okinawa in southern Japan. This specialist session is about navigating global fundraising. I'm going to help you decide if this is something you want to get into, or if you're doing it already, this will help you take the temperature of your global fundraising programs and suggest practical ways to make them more efficient and effective. Or if you're based in the global south and aiming to diversify your income with domestic donations, this session is for you too. My focus as always is to help you, your organisation or project, however small and out of your depth you may feel, to raise big chunks of money overseas. First, I'm going to frame this conversation within the big issues of today that are changing and challenging global fundraising right now. First, COVID-19. Second, rising awareness around inequality and privilege. And third, the problems with the northern approach when it comes to global fundraising. Now, after this light and airy start, I'll step down from my soapbox to focus on the practical stuff. I'm going to talk about the core differences between fundraising at home and fundraising overseas, and the things that are pretty much the same for both. Then 6 hard questions we should all be asking that will help us to decide whether to dial up or dial down different parts of our global fundraising. Then I'm going to go beyond the usual tips on local culture and customs to explore some other ways of gaining a competitive advantage with overseas donors. I'm going to share some of the really hard lessons I've learned using the words of 11 big global donors and others. I'm going to introduce a toolkit that will make your global fundraising even more efficient and more effective. Then a very special offer, just for you here at IFAB Online. Sadly, it's not cake, but I think you'll like these 3 things. If you like free things, if you're up for trying new tech, and if you're looking for accessible, high-impact guidance on global fundraising during what promises to be a challenging but potentially exciting 2021. Then at the end, I'm going to set you a challenge, a mission to take away with you. So, who am I? I'm Craig. I've been fundraising for 25 years. I started shaking buckets at university and raised my first project grant as a volunteer in Nigeria a few years later. Since then, I've worked with every type of donor, thousands of them, and with hundreds of fundraisers, non-profits and projects in more than 70 countries across the world. I also trained as an accountant with KPMG and held a couple of fundraising leadership roles at Amref Health Africa and SOAS, London's School of Oriental and African Studies. I've now been a fundraising consultant for almost a decade. I guide organisations with their big fundraising decisions, including many global non-profits like these. But my passion and my focus is helping small non-profits, fundraising startups and projects to get their first or their next donations. I'm fundraising right now here on Okinawa as a volunteer. I've just raised $10,000 to buy the local university their first traditional wooden dragon boat, which is a big thing here. And I'm helping a tiny local charity to create and fund a sea turtle sanctuary on a local beach. Oh, and I once cycled 17,000 kilometres with my wife from London in the UK to Cape Town in South Africa, camping and carrying all of our own stuff. It took a year. We raised nearly $100,000 for our charity partners. Now, if you really want to find out more about me, you can just look me up on LinkedIn or visit fundraisingradicals.com. Or you can just drop me an email to say hi. It's craig@fundraisingradicals.com. It's fair to say that the waters of global fundraising are really rough at the moment and hard to navigate. So, let's talk briefly about the big global issues impacting on all our lives and global fundraising. First, COVID-19. It's thrown an almighty giant spanner into all of our lives. We're all exhausted from juggling everything. We're all zoom-eyed and not yet seeing the end of this. I'm not here to tell you that the future of global fundraising is rosy. We're trying to cling on to good news where we can. That's part of the coping process when living in uncertain times. In reality, we probably won't be able to visit overseas donors until later in 2021 at the earliest. And the impact of COVID-19 is head-spinning. Some regions and areas are really struggling. They've been hammered by COVID-19. But others, such as water and sanitation and hygiene programs in Asia and Africa, have found themselves as a major part of the global response to COVID-19. But the true impact of COVID has only just started to reach our fundraising results. Some of the impacts have been felt already, and they have been painful. It will take years for some of the bigger ripples to reach us, as partnerships are not renewed, funding programs are scaled back or cut entirely, as domestic priorities are prioritised over global priorities. We've already seen this with the huge cuts to DFID's budget. The world's big economies are shrinking, and the trillions of dollars, yen, rupees, yuan, euros and pounds that are funding today's government stimulus programs have been borrowed from future government funding and cuts. So our organisations need to be lean and smart. We all know this, but even being both of these things might not be enough to survive the storms of the coming 5 years. Every option has to be on the table: cuts, redundancies, mergers, acquisitions, mothballs even. We're having difficult but important conversations about our priorities, what we can cut and what we can keep. These are tough, but it's also really important that fundraising, investment is part of these conversations. We must view investment in fundraising alongside that in domestic fundraising. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a little while, but the bottom line is that now is the time to reflect and act, to prepare for difficult times ahead, to ensure that our global fundraising is as efficient as it can possibly be. The long-term future of our organisations and beneficiaries depends on us and the decisions we are making now and in the coming year. But there are also some big positives. For some of us, global fundraising might seem like too big a risk right now, while for others it never really stops because we get all our funding from overseas donors. Yet others are seeing this as an opportunity because in fundraising terms, global donors are currently being engaged and stewarded in exactly the same way as domestic donors. In this way, COVID has further levelled the playing field as to who can now fundraise across borders. Global fundraising, particularly north to south and north to Asia, used to only really be cost effective for big global non-profits. But for now, some of these barriers have disappeared. We're seeing a new hybrid of face-to-face and digital engagement emerge, and an opening of the market that will become the new normal for global fundraising. New players, new challenges and new opportunities for those who are willing to pursue them. So how about a practical idea that can be delivered digitally might help to manage your risk and explore the potential of a new global donor group? How about trying out your own global major gift challenge where an existing donor, if you're lucky enough to have one with a regional interest, offers to show leadership in these difficult times, to test a new region and stimulate first donations from a priority donor group or city or country by offering a challenge donation. For example, I'll donate $10,000 if you secure 50 donations from Singapore or Brazil. This could be a simple and effective way of testing and priming a new global donor group or market. Second, the global conversation about inequality and privilege. These matter a great deal when it comes to global fundraising. Many of our organisations are neck deep in fights for social justice. We're trying to build a fairer and more equitable world. We work with colleagues and donors who bring diverse experiences and ideas from every corner of the world. But every donation we fundraise has the potential to reduce inequality, but some can always grow different types of inequality. And it's never ever simple. As fundraisers, we can often find ourselves in the position of deciding who gets the opportunity within our organisation to apply for funding, who can access the process, who gets our support. Our internal relationships and those of our managers influence who gets the funding. And then there's privilege. This is a part of global fundraising that I don't think we talk about enough. Now, I am the least qualified person to talk about privilege. That I'm even talking about privilege here probably demonstrates my privilege better than anything else. So I'll keep it brief. But I do know that stepping across cultural and national borders to fundraise comes with a responsibility to be more aware. We can all be more aware of our own privilege and that of the institution or organisation we represent. We can all better understand the history of the region and the people we are engaging with. We can all consider and challenge unequal power dynamics within our organisations when it comes to who can access donors and therefore funding. We can all be more aware of how we use our privilege to access donors. We can all be more aware of how our privilege affects whose voices and opinions we prioritise and hear. And we can definitely all talk about this more. Now, the third and final issue, it's related to the accessibility of fundraising knowledge and tools globally. Almost all fundraising books, knowledge, resources and tools are based in experiences of fundraising taken from the global north, and almost all are based on the experiences of big organisations. Frankly, if you're a registered charity or non-profit in a mature fundraising market, how to fundraise in Europe or North America is pretty clear. There's a charity sector law, for a start, which there isn't in places like Myanmar, for example. There are also lots of fundraising experts and resources. There are established donor types and processes for approaching them. There are incredible communities with thousands of fundraisers covering every issue and sector. But what if you're seeking funding to keep a child nutrition project running in rural Sri Lanka? What if you're trying to build the first liberal arts and sciences college in Myanmar? What if you're trying to fund a small conservation project in Rwanda? Or ensuring that 100 street children get daily food and education in Peru? Often, the only available sources of northern-style funding are a small group of oversubscribed global foundations and overseas development assistance from northern governments. The northern approach to major gift fundraising just doesn't work in the global south. Now, add to this limited opportunities to gain good quality fundraising experience, an emerging or non-existent charity sector, or even no charity law. The barriers to success in fundraising in the south are enormous. Also, what if you do live in a mature fundraising market but you're small? What if you want to get funding from a handful of big donors for a local community project in Europe and North America? What if you're a parent in Birmingham, in the UK or Alabama, who wants to furnish the library of a local primary school, or a junior academic seeking funding for your PhD or research project that doesn't quite fit with the usual donor priorities? What if you're a Paris-based trustee of a small Asian health project who wants to effectively support the small charity towards fundraising success? The northern fundraising approach falls down here too, because most of the donors in these markets are not accessible to us. Because getting one in 5 funding proposals funded is considered a success, and for small outfits, the numbers just don't work without a high volume of proposals, which means you need at least one person dedicated to this. The odds are massively stacked against us. We need a different approach that is based in real-life global experiences, global challenges, and global opportunities. Now, I'll step down off my soapbox. Let's pull ourselves out of the doom and gloom, and for the rest of this session, think about how we practically navigate global fundraising during the next 5 years and make smart decisions about our priorities. I'm now going to dig into the differences, both real and perceived, and the similarities between domestic and global fundraising, and how we can jump some of these barriers to seize new overseas opportunities. The next few slides are really for smaller organisations and projects who are new or just starting out in global fundraising. If you're already doing a lot of global fundraising, feel free to go make yourself a cup of tea or catch up on email for a few moments. Same, but different. I first heard this expression in Laos along with every other traveller who has ever visited Southeast Asia. For me, this phrase perfectly captures how we should approach global fundraising from global donors, compared to how we should approach fundraising from domestic donors. Let's start with the differences. Seeking funding across international borders can be daunting and exciting because everything looks, sounds and tastes different. Like stepping off a plane in a new country for the first time, those first steps can be the hardest, but each one gets easier as everything becomes more familiar. So different cultures, time zones, languages, logistics, words, expectations, ethics, expertise all add new, challenging layers to our fundraising. They can also be major barriers, both real and perceived, that can even prevent us from engaging global audiences in the first place. They can stop us from stepping out that door. But in reality, most of these things are just logistics. They can be planned, prepared and managed away, and we shouldn't let any of these get in the way of doing fundraising. The others can all be overcome with growing our understanding and local expertise. And I cannot stress this enough. Our own understanding of the region and area we're fundraising in and local expert guidance are the two things that make global fundraising possible, wherever we're fundraising. Unlike domestic fundraising success, global fundraising hinges on the quality of our regional and local partnerships. Resources, as I said earlier, is a big barrier for smaller organisations to begin global fundraising, and it's still the case, as reaching overseas requires a chunk of upfront investment and confidence. But digital has partially levelled the playing field, and COVID has forced us all to play the same game. Now, profitable fundraising overseas is now within reach of more organisations. And finally, it's important to remember that this experience will probably feel very different for the donor too. So we also have a responsibility to guide them. Once we get past the multiple but mainly manageable differences, the really important parts of fundraising remain the same when we reach overseas for donations. Fundamentally, donors will donate if they trust us and if we present them with an idea and project that they value. The reasons why people donate are also consistent across the world. There was an interesting piece of global research done in Brazil a few years ago by De Gasperi. It identifies the 49, main donor motivations, and these motivations feel so familiar and globally relevant. It shows that we're all motivated by the same things, just to different degrees, whether we're in India or Indonesia. So it's comforting to know that. But it's also really important to always tailor our approach and avoid assumptions and stereotypes. We do this by focusing only on the person in front of us. It's also more efficient for us to focus on big donations. Not what's big for other organisations, but what's big for us, because big is always relative. And success always comes down to us delivering sufficient value so that a donor is motivated to donate. So we lead with relevant impact, not with fundraising. And we lead with our priority work, because only these will deliver funding that has real value to us too, exactly as it does at home. And most importantly, we relax. We learn from our inevitable mistakes and don't let them dent our confidence. As we continue to make smart and evidence-based decisions, we enjoy the ride and make sure our donors are enjoying it too. As a donor in Vietnam once told me, I donate only because it is fun. If it becomes not fun, I stop. Is our global fundraising still a good idea? Now, two brief definitions before we get into this, just to be sure we're all on the same page. First, you may have noticed that I use the word donor as a catch-all for prospects and donors of all shapes and sizes. Second, I group donors together not by how much they give or even from where they give, but by why they value the work I or we do. Because for me, why donors value our work is the most important thing that they have in common. It's at the heart of the fundraising contract that we have with them, and it's the foundation of efficient fundraising across borders. Global fundraising isn't a binary decision. It's not something we do or we don't do. It's also tempting to consider global fundraising in one dimension as income growth. But let's also consider global fundraising more broadly, because it doesn't just provide us with income, it diversifies our financial risk, it allows us to capture unique opportunities, it grows our credibility and network. It enables us to maximize our competitive advantage in new places with new groups of donors. My view is that progress in global fundraising is less like flipping a switch on or off, more like moving a dial on our mix of domestic and global funding. We can dial our percentage of global fundraising up or dial it down relative to our fundraising investment. We can also dial up and dial down investment on specific global programs. This is really about optimizing the return on investment across our whole fundraising program, thinking globally when we make investment decisions. Now, what percentage of our income is from overseas versus domestic sources? Let's think about our own global fundraising on this very simplistic scale. Plot where we are now today and where we want to be and when. You've got 3 seconds to do this, so don't think too hard about it. Chances are that wherever we are today, we'll want to maximize our opportunities and diversify our fundraising. For those of us on the left, with natural overseas donor groups who only receive a tiny proportion of our funding from overseas donors, we probably want to be looking to slide to the right. At the other end of the scale are our organisations that receive 100% of their funding from overseas donors. Many INGOs receiving bilateral and multilateral grants will land here. To be frank, if this is you, you must move to the left. If you're working for an INGO, lobby your leadership to build domestic fundraising capacity so you can increase local and regional funding, because overseas development funding is only going in one direction. But wherever we are on this scale and wherever we want to be, each transition will be incremental because it involves investment or divestment of time and cash, building networks to access new groups of donors, dipping our toes into new regional partnerships, testing and refining our messages, investing in new infrastructure and expertise, or politely exiting a market, gently deflating raised expectations, because it's okay to turn the dial down if a group of overseas donors is not performing. This is a list of 6 questions to help us decide if we need to turn the dial up or turn the dial down on the fundraising time and budget we're investing in each of our overseas donor groups. We're asking, is fundraising from this global donor group still a priority, given everything else is going on right now? This could be an Okinawan diaspora group living in New York who are passionate about the real-world impact of science, for example, or retired British female professors and teachers living in Uganda who are passionate about girls' education, another example. These 6 questions aim to objectively assess if we should be investing more or less of our fundraising hours with a particular group of donors. Take a moment now to think about each of these questions in relation to one of your own groups of donors that is based overseas. Just pause the video now. Hopefully, if you did pause it and spent that time, that was helpful. It's worth doing this exercise regularly, or at least having these questions in our heads when we're thinking about donor groups. Simply put, global fundraising success is about maximizing our competitive advantage with a particular overseas donor group. This is not in relation to other organizations, but it's about maximizing income from our limited resources. It's also about making the right global fundraising opportunities competitive internally, because there's always a choice about investment. Now, there's a lot of advice about local customs, what to do and what not to do to gain or lose an edge, the competitive advantage edge. Whether it's about which chair to occupy at a donor dinner in China, or the colour of gift wrapping paper in Japan. These things are all helpful, but they're also easy to be distracted by. They're given a lot of weight. In reality, they demand exactly the same approach as our domestic fundraising. They come naturally when we have respect, awareness, and good local advice. and almost all mistakes are forgivable. But the customs don't really grow our competitive advantage when fundraising overseas. And this is critical when making decisions about global fundraising, so that our efforts are rewarded with big donations and we can decide which way we want to turn the dial. So let's assume that we are delivering impact and that a group of overseas donors really values the work we're doing. What else might give us a competitive regional advantage? First, let's think about our pipelines of future donors. Where are our future donations going to come from? An objective assessment is an important first step here. We examine all options and make evidence-based decisions. Following our most promising donor pipelines will give us an advantage. We ask, where are the donors who most naturally value our work? Which of these have the most capacity to give? Are there sufficient numbers of donors to justify investment? And if we don't have a natural pipeline of donors, then we shouldn't even consider fundraising here. Next, financial flows. If we understand how finance flows within our target region, we know better where to dip our fundraising bucket. This is a quote from one financier turned fundraiser who raised $25 million to build a hospital. So we ask, where is the disposable wealth in this nation or region? Is it managed by a handful of corporations, a clique of wealthy royals, or a small network of experts and professionals? Who decides about donations? And how can we access these people and organizations? For example, a recent client of mine in Myanmar was focused on engaging and fundraising from wealthy monks. This is an important donor group for them. Until we stepped back and mapped and thought about carefully where the money and financial decisions were being made. And we realized that it isn't the monks who decide how to spend their money, it's the sponsors of the monks who do that. Their donations are restricted to fund a specific, usually religious project. It was a really useful pivot to understand who had the power in decision making within these donations. And it unlocked $4 million within 7 months for this organisation. Next, social structures. This is a helpful, maybe, social model that uses concentric circles to map the relative size of self, of family, community, religion, nation, region, global, etc. I think we can use this idea to help us identify where are the spaces for donations. Where might they be in each of our global donor groups? It can help us to refine how we pitch our work and how we steward donors. For example, for many US donors, the central self-circle might be relatively big. Making generalizations and assumptions here, but it tends to be true that the global circle also tends to be relatively small. So drivers of donation donations are more likely to be related to identity, recognition, tax efficiency, and domestic causes are favoured over global causes. In India, the family and community tend to be larger than the self, and region often trumps nation. This might be part of the reason why fundraising in India from outside is so challenging, while so many local community projects thrive, and why overseas remittances into India are $60 to $80 billion a year. Language expertise will make everything easier in global fundraising. It's not always a practical thing we can invest in. It takes a lot of time, but it should be high on the list when hiring global fundraisers and deciding about where we should fundraise. Or understanding local fundraising norms could also be helpful. For example, family to family is how top-level major gift fundraising is done in Palestine. We can gain an understanding by finding out about the donors to similar regional projects that have happened before and the relationships between these donors. This regional fundraising intelligence might help our competitive advantage and can be explored with our local expert, which brings me back to the same point as earlier. Finding and working with the right people is the most difficult challenge we face. We're likely to be dependent on local expertise. Our networks often limit who we can have access to, and it's sometimes easier to choose an easy partner than the right partner or advisor who can help us to access the key regional influencers. which in many regions have the power to make our fundraising possible. For example, for higher education in Hong Kong, there is a powerful woman called Mrs. Lam. She's a little bit mysterious and interesting, but she seems to oversee and authorize many major fundraising projects involving foreign universities there. And of course, as always, access to these people, as at home, will be our primary determinant of fundraising success. Now some light relief for you, not so much for me, as I relive some of my hardest global fundraising lessons fully public. Although these 11 direct quotations, they come from donors and colleagues I've worked with in the past. These lessons are relevant to us all if we're fundraising across borders, no matter if we're aiming to raise $10,000 or £10 million, whether ours is a local community project or something much bigger. I've added some of my main takeaways from these sometimes bruising encounters. The former Chief Secretary of Hong Kong does not waste words, and she only asks really difficult questions. This was her questioning the value that we were bringing to the region, and specifically to her commitment to the constitutional reform of Hong Kong. I think our global fundraising should always come with this question. For every group we will have fundraising conversations with. Crossing international borders to fundraise raises the investment, the stakes, and it sharpens our need to have a bloody good answer to this question. We need an answer that is based in impact, that is locally relevant, genuine and compelling. And if we don't have a good enough answer, then we probably shouldn't be there at all. This was the Gambia meeting regional donors to build West Africa's first social enterprise hospital. Taf and Jai had a multi-million equity stake in the project, and I was cheekily asking him to make a donation on top of that. According to Taf, everyone he meets asks him for money, repaying those who paid his school fees all those years ago, paying for the education, health and housing costs of distant relatives and relatives of friends, building a mosque in his hometown, setting up a corporate foundation. It's never enough, says Taf. But to me, this started to feel a bit like a well-rehearsed narrative of rejection. So I asked if he could actually afford all of these things and still fund the entire hospital. Thankfully, he found it funny. I left with 3 things required when fundraising from wealthy individuals in West Africa: a pledged amount, a name, and a telephone number of the one person in the entourage who deals with these things, normally a lawyer or an accountant, and a personal cell number. My takeaways? I'm nervous to generalize here, but in my experience, wealthy Africans are asked for money by everyone they meet. And they're used to saying no. They're often surrounded by gatekeepers who are also seeking cash and favour themselves. Our challenge then is to find out who are the senior people that they cannot say no to. Friends of their parents, their elder siblings. These people can get us that all-important face-to-face meeting. Third, our projects can give these donors something to point to, like the mosque or the foundation, to help further build their narrative of rejection when the fourth cousins do come calling. Fourth, our projects have steep competition. The need for funding in West Africa is enormous. So our projects have to deliver impact that is local, personal and genuine, and we must offer something different because our projects cannot compete with the impact there. Their cash can make when they donate it directly to people they really care about. I think that now might also be a good moment to briefly explore diaspora funding. Diaspora communities can seem like an easy fundraising market, although in reality I've never found these groups to be easy. Engaging diaspora groups can provide a vital access point and give our work credibility and community ownership, but diaspora fundraising is also really difficult. That group tends to be quite obvious and relatively easy to access, so they can become oversubscribed by local causes. Second, they make overseas remittances which feed and clothe their families at home. There's no more direct impact than that. Third, there's a sort of circular feedback loop from the local community. They communicate about the impact of our project or the lack of visible impact to overseas relatives and international communities. This means we have to be delivering exceptional work. Those organisations that do make diaspora fundraising work don't try to compete on the individual level of impact. They address community level issues and bigger picture things like economic, social and political progress, like OIST, the local science and tech university here. They can focus on preservation of culture, like the Palestinian Museum did so well. Investment in education infrastructure and health. These are all things that tap into diaspora community's strong sense of home and identity and triggers the lingering sense of regret and guilt that many expats feel towards those they've left behind. So we need to deliver genuine long-term impact, get the right people talking about the right things in the right places to make diaspora funding work. Being compared to someone's concentration camp guard, i.e. their torturer, is a pretty serious insult, maybe one of the worst, and it's definitely not my preferred way to start a donor meeting. Particularly not one we were hoping to raise £250,000 from. By the end of this meeting, Seng T, the self-proclaimed Pineapple King of Singapore, made a firm pledge towards the SOAS library. He also apologised for his earlier comments. He explained that he'd been upset because SOAS had never thanked him for the £80,000 donation he had made 10 years earlier. It was quite the turnaround. So what are the lessons here? Sometimes donors behave badly and cultural differences only excuse so much. Often there's an explanation that might not be clear or that we will never understand because we are from different worlds. So we always suck it up in the room. But we also make a choice about who we take money from, as we will have to work with these people for years to come, and some partnerships are just not worth the cash they deliver in terms of time, stress and general unpleasantness. And finally, we always thank our donors, no matter how far away they feel, and we check that they feel thanked. This person was aiming, rightly, to express that the process of raising £5 million or raising £50,000 was the same. And that is largely true. However, these are not just zeros. They point to two organisations at very different points in their life cycle, two different sets of opportunities. They also highlight the two worlds of global fundraising. The first is dominated by big fundraising operations, which have built big global brands and measure their history in centuries. They have big dedicated fundraising teams. They fundraise big donations from big networks of wealthy and connected alumni. And they have the cachet and reputation that big donors want to align with. And that's great for them. But there's everybody else. This world is rarely accessible to our smaller non-profits, our projects and causes that don't have the resources or networks to compete on this scale. So we have to box clever. This is an expression I first heard from Frank Bruno, the British boxer who was big in the 1980s. It means to be smart and play to our strengths when we're outweighed by the competition. So our smaller organisations focus on specific, tightly defined donor groups who we can access, who have the capacity to donate, who value our work sufficiently to do so. And we remember that big is relative. Oxford may have blinked for a moment when this arrived. We danced around the office when this £50,000 donation arrived, and it saved the eyesight of more than 2,000 people in southern Kenya. So no, these are not just zeros. Omar is one of the nicest, sharpest and most effective people I have ever worked with. And this was part of his brief for a case for support to raise funding to build the Palestinian Museum in Birzeit in the West Bank, a $60 million project. The primary audiences were donors in Europe and North America, but the case had to be true to the experiences of Palestinians. Now, much of the regional bandwidth for major gifts in the region is consumed with supporting Palestinians, displaced Palestinians, with basic food, water, shelter and legal aid, and humanitarian programs that support millions of other communities displaced by regional conflicts. The Palestinian Museum couldn't directly compete for funding with these massive humanitarian causes, and nor should it. The purpose of the museum was eventually articulated as an invitation to the world to contribute to a new narrative of what it means to be Palestinian. One not grounded in despair and dispossession, but in hope and humanity. A place for all Palestinians to come to explore, express, document, build, share and understand what it means to be Palestinian in today's world. When fundraising in Africa, Asia and the Middle East, it can be difficult to see past the big regional challenges when understanding how to deliver and communicate our impact. Positioning our cause and communicating our aspiration is only possible with expertise in the region and lived experience, and this was Omar's role within this conversation. As fundraisers, we're never going to be regional experts, but we must find these regional experts and listen to them to have any chance of building personal trust with donor groups. We must also understand the big issues, because there's never an excuse for going in blind. In addition to engaging experts and having this core knowledge of the region we're fundraising in, our role is also to challenge and ask difficult questions. So between the two sides we can forge something fundable. So our sensitivity, objectivity and understanding of donors can also help us to take the heat out of these sometimes difficult conversations when we're engaging with challenging politics and deep, deep passions. This is still one of my favourite fundraising conversations ever. I was in Jordan off duty, offering friendly advice to a colleague while smoking argila shisha pipes. The money was legitimate, taxed at source, and a genuine unrestricted donation. This person is clever, connected, creative. She was born in Kurdistan. The point here is that fundraising and financial ethics are based in local culture. They change when we cross borders. What's normal in Nigeria, Palestine, Myanmar, Kurdistan might conflict with charity regulations, tax laws, other laws in the UK, the US, Hong Kong, etc. Global partnerships, particularly from Europe and North America to the world, challenge our existing ethical framework. They also challenge internal organisational relationships. So if we're going to fundraise globally, we must be committed to making it work. We must be willing to navigate differences effectively without judgment and with lots of creativity. It's always necessary to have people who understand both cultures. We also need understanding decision makers in our organisations, solid risk management processes in place, and clear communications about why we're fundraising here and how we're fundraising here. If we can manage expectations, we can also help to fix situations like this. We also need to be able to quickly understand and communicate our red lines in situations like this, and to explain why these are our red lines and why we cannot cross them. So, what was my answer to this question? The less I know about this, the better for everyone. And she managed it in the end with a little help from the Italian government. Global fundraising has taught me to leave my ego at the door. As fundraisers, we get used to feeling like a spare part. The spare part that does all of the work and gets none of the credit. Robin is great. She was 98% joking when she said this, but the 2% she wanted to remind me of her expectations. She was friends with Professor Cora, the brilliant founder of the African Research Excellence Fund. She wanted to signal that this one-to-one meeting between her and me, the one that we were having now, was a one-off. Senior donors demand senior and consistent attention, so we must question how much resource we have to invest in global relationships and the appetite of our organisational leaders to deliver on these promises. Right now, the direct face-to-face engagement is something we might have to dial down in the coming year or more, because charity leaders will not be able to travel and they have their hands full keeping our organisations afloat. So we need to become creative, do more with less time, and explore what works for us, our leaderships, our donors, whether we're moving them towards a donation or reporting on our impact. If you stick around to the end of this session, one of the exclusive offers is to take part in a beta test for a new, shiny and exciting digital tool that will help you engage and steward global donors. More on that soon. Speaking of egos, our fundraising time is precious and we must make difficult but vital decisions as to who we spend it with. This applies to all our fundraising activities, whether it's on the other side of the world or in our local time, whether the conversation is a Zoom call, by email, or a face-to-face meeting. Victor, bless him, is chairman of a major bank in Hong Kong. He's what I would describe as a non-perennial, non-donor, a collector of attention. He takes a lot of time and gives very little away. I really struggled to cut him loose. He was just so rich, so well connected, and he'd meet me whenever I was in Hong Kong, but three things became clear that made this one our final meeting. The organisation I was representing could never offer him the profile and attention he needed. That he was unlikely to ever donate any meaningful sum, and that my time was being used to entertain him and stroke his ego. For me, it always comes down to value, our value too. The question is meeting this person the best use of my time? If not, then we stop meeting them, no matter how nice they are, no matter how nice the pictures are on the office of the wall, and no matter how nice the view is from his office, or how intimidating the original Van Gogh is over his fireplace. We remove ourselves from the conversation politely and firmly. We avoid being tempted by donations and partnerships that never quite appear. This one really hurt. I was working in Hong Kong, again, met Gerald Chan. He's the guy who donated $350 million to Harvard to endow its work on public health. He'd done this a few years previously. I had a previous conversation with him when I was at SOAS about a £1 million project. Over coffee I asked him, why did you never donate to SOAS? His response was, SOAS was never really important to me. Harvard changed my life. Also, Craig, as I remember it, you never presented me with a $350 million idea. Ouch. What are the lessons here? First, the importance of managing expectations. This is particularly true when working across borders, cultures, languages, when miscommunication and misunderstanding can become much more likely. Also, donors tend to be clever, international people, so let's be clear in our communications and ask the same from them so we don't waste each other's time. And big, as I said, is relative. Gerald and SOAS were playing in different leagues. Our expectations were not matched, so my £1 million donation just sort of drifted past him unnoticed, like a little wooden raft drifting past a giant oil tanker. Second to last, Odette was our French pilot as we flew from Nairobi to Gedo in Somalia for a monitoring and evaluation project at an AMREF hospital project for CordAid. She was incredibly calm but not at all reassuring. She told us that we were more likely to be killed by the camels wandering onto the runway as we landed than the militia member who was enthusiastically firing a Kalashnikov into the air below us. Global fundraising sometimes takes us to challenging places. These are places where our colleagues live and work every day, often under the most difficult of circumstances. And these sort of trips remind me that no matter how hard I think the fundraising is, it's never as hard as working at the coalface of global programs and having to do the fundraising on top of that. It's also important to remember that global fundraising can also become a little bit more than exciting when we're allowed to travel again. We'll inevitably take risks that we wouldn't at home, and sometimes we get out of our depth. The lesson for me here is to be careful, to listen to local experts who know these places so we know to be careful of the right things, i.e. the camels, not the guns. And finally, it's usual to say an enthusiastic kanpai when toasting with sake in Japan. But I got cocky and decided to use the fancy English version of Chin Chin. Our host, the 90-plus-year-old Buddhist founder of the Buddhist sect Agon Shu, then explained in great detail what it meant in Japanese in front of a dozen illustrious dinner guests, including my Vice-Chancellor. After all of those, we get back to the really practical stuff. This next section is about introducing a toolkit for global fundraising that works everywhere, because global fundraising can and is being done everywhere. I founded the Fundraising Radicals and wrote the book to share the fundraising knowledge and tools that are used every day by us fundraising professionals and consultants with new and even reluctant fundraisers everywhere, whether you're in Europe, Africa, Asia or the Middle East. anyone who needs funding to get their own project off the ground, or those in the global south who need to diversify their income from global fundraising and dial up their domestic fundraising so they can become more financially resilient and truly independent. This toolkit is not grounded, as I said earlier, in the experiences of the North, but global experiences from conversations with thousands of donors, fundraisers and non-profits in places like Armenia, Iraq, Pakistan, Ghana, Peru, Kyrgyzstan, Palestine, Costa Rica, Myanmar, Japan, Zimbabwe, Uganda, China and dozens more. It's grounded in the ideas also of a private sector startup tool called the Business Model Canvas. If you don't know what this is, you should definitely check it out. It's brilliant. It's a tool for creating a business model that fits onto one page of A4. This Global Fundraising Toolkit also incorporates ideas from the Lean Startup by Eric Ries and Blue Ocean Strategy by Morborn and Kim. We've re-engineered these ideas so they work for global fundraising, and we've piloted this with fundraising startups in more than a dozen countries, and it's relevant and working in every one, and the tools are free. So, the premise is that there are 10 basic building blocks of effective fundraising, and we call them the fundraising radicals. They're the real-life drivers behind global fundraising success, and each radical comes with a question. Our challenge is to find our very own answer to each of these 10 questions. Fundamentally, the approach and the tools are all about maximizing value. The value of our work, the value we deliver to donors, and the value of our time and resources. It's all about efficiency and about getting the job of fundraising done in real life. This is the fundraising canvas. It brings the fundraising radicals together and fits onto one page of A4. The canvas keeps us focused on the 10 things that really matter and deliver results. And it also creates not a strategy, but our very own tailored model of fundraising that is as unique as us and our singular mix of donors, opportunities and challenges. This model will guide all of our future fundraising activity. And the canvas is flexible. We can complete it in a few hours, head straight out to validate our ideas and assumptions, then incorporate these and this learning into the next draft. It helps us learn what works today so we can apply it and test it tomorrow. So, what are these 10 building blocks? Arguably, the first 3 are the most important radicals, because if we can get clear and compelling answers to these first 3 questions, we can get out the door to have credible conversations with our global donors. The first 3 make up the top third of the canvas. They are donor groups. Who will fund us and why? We group and describe our global donors based on why they value our work. Next, case for support. What is our best and most fundable work? We dive deep into our own priorities. Third, value propositions. How will we present our most fundable work to our most likely donors? This brings the first 2 radicals together to create our targeted pitches. Even fundraising radicals need a process. And the next 3 radicals are how we design and build our own process, the one that we will use to turn new donors into donations. This is the middle section of the fundraising canvas. It's made up of new donors. How will we find and engage new donors? Next, donor moves. What is our process for turning new donors into donations? Next, donor conversations. How will we interact with donors at each stage of their journey and their experience with us? And the final 4 radicals, the bottom of the fundraising canvas, is all about our resources and results. The relevant radicals are resources. What do we really need to fundraise efficiently and effectively? This is one of our big conversations right now. Partners. Who will help us and why? Again, selecting, incentivizing and engaging overseas partners so we can access their expertise and networks will be a big factor in our global fundraising success. Then it's about the money. Costs. How much will our fundraising model cost? And income. Last of all, how much will we raise? The next tool is the fundraising matrix. It takes us deeper into the first three radicals: donor groups, case for support, and value propositions. This tool forces us to think about and then describe each of our donor groups. It helps us to structure our priority work into fundable packages. And then it shows where we might have likely matches between these two. These matches are where we focus our effort to build compelling value propositions. There is also a space for the name of the first person from that donor group with whom we will meet and test our value proposition. It's a gentle nudge out the door to start having those first conversations with donors in a particular region. And these conversations will help us to validate our assumptions and learn what works and what doesn't. So they are the core tools that will help you build and focus your global fundraising activity. Now, before I send you off on your final mission, here are three very special offers exclusive for you special people here at IFAB Online. First, some free stuff. Free downloads, a copy of my book, all the tools, and this presentation with all of my notes. Just visit fundraisingradicals.com and start downloading. Second, access to something new called Mercury. This is a cutting-edge digital donor management and engagement tool from our friend and digital fundraising genius Jonathan May, the chief exec of Hubbub. Visit their website if you're interested in joining the beta test. It's a bit like peeking into the future of global donor stewardship. And enjoy. And last but not least, a very big discount. If you need expert guidance to sharpen your overseas fundraising and to navigate the challenges and opportunities of global fundraising during 2021, join me and become just one of just 24 global fundraisers on our second annual global fundraising program. This might be the very best investment you make in your global fundraising for the coming year. Places are limited and being filled quickly, so go visit fundraisingradicals.com to find out more and claim your discounted place. And please don't just take my word for the program's impact. So here we are at the end of this specialist session on diving deeper into global fundraising. Here's your mission if you want to try the canvas out for yourself. First, think of a specific group of overseas donors who have a natural fit with your work. Second, download your own fundraising canvas and the book for free at fundraisingradicals.com and complete it for the donor group you have in your mind. Third, email your fundraising canvas to me for some personal feedback and guidance to make it even better. It's Craig at fundraisingradicals.com. And that's all from me for now. I hope this has been a useful, deeper dive into global fundraising. There are a lot of very smart and very successful fundraising experts doing other sessions here at IFAB Online, so please do check them out. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon, and take good care.